this is Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, President of Skinner Leadership Institute. We are thrilled by the partnership with the Progressive National Baptist Convention through its president, Dr. Timothy Stewart, in a life-sustaining vaccine education campaign. PNBC has long been known for its commitment to erasing systemic health disparities that have afflicted African Americans and continue to do so. Skinner Leadership Institute, the National African American Clergy Network, our co-conveners, Dr. Otis Moss Jr., Dr. T. DeWitt Smith Jr., and Values Partnership look forward to receiving the amazing results we know will come through this life-sustaining campaign carried out to the glory of God.
Hello, I'm Pastor Bird from Zion Baptist Church. We want to make sure that the Word of God gets directly to you, and we thank God for this opportunity. You can join us for worship at our online home live streaming at ziondc.org. You will love the experience of true worship at a high time in the Lord and a powerful word from God. Through YouTube, Facebook, even via Zoom, where you can get a call-in option. Follow us, like us, let us know you're there. You can subscribe. Just go to ziondc.org. The Spirit of the Lord is upon us, and you don't want to miss it. Hope to have you with us soon. Thank you, and God bless.
Hi, I'm Edna Kane Williams, Executive Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer for AARP. I'm here to tell you how delighted we are to be working with the Progressive National Baptist Convention. You have been long-term partners with AARP. We appreciate that, and we've always done good work together. It's really critical at this point, however, that we work together on vaccine education. I'm here today to applaud our new venture, co-venture, Voices for Vaccine Education. Everyone knows about the pandemic. Everyone knows about the dire impact that COVID has had on our communities. We're looking forward to getting back to normalcy, to getting back to our lives, to getting back to our faith communities. To do so, we're joining with you to educate people about the importance of getting vaccines. We are anxious to do what we can to address this, to stop the sickness, to stop the levels of death that we're seeing, and answering questions and providing education about the available vaccines is a very real way to do that. Thank you for our partnership. We value PNBC, the Progressive National Baptist Convention. As I said, we've been working with you for 10 years, and we hope to be working with you as long into the future, 10 more years, 20 more years. Because together we're stronger, together we can do more, together our voices will be heard. So thank you for your work, thank you for this partnership, and God bless.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Ron Daniels, President of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century and convener of the National African American Reparations Commission. Welcoming you to the National Progressive Baptist Convention's PNBC monthly broadcast. Our topic for today is People of Faith Acting to Advance Reparations in H.R. 40. What a special topic. Before I introduce our panel, however, I just want to give a shout out to and a thank you to my longtime friend, our longtime friend, the Reverend Dr. Tyrone Pitts. the Secretary General Emeritus of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. He was on the front lines for many, many, many years, and many of us had relationship with him. He is undoubtedly one of the great freedom fighters of our time. So Reverend Pitts, thank you so much for presenting us with this opportunity. I'd also like to acknowledge Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, the courageous and visionary lead sponsor for HR 40. She will be joining us at the end of this program for concluding remarks. Now I'd like to introduce our panel. We have assembled a powerful, powerful panel for this conversation. Reverend Dr. Joanne Watson, Wake Up Detroit. That's what we call her. She is a powerful spokesperson. She is a former member of the Detroit City Council, and she's also the senior pastor at the Westside Unity Church in Detroit, Michigan. The Reverend Dr. Robert Turner is the senior pastor at the historic Vernon AME Church in Tulsa, and you saw him recently on a number of programs that were talking about Tulsa and the Tulsa Massacre. The Reverend Audrey Alexander, the Associate General Secretary for Advocacy and Action for Justice and Peace, the National Council of Churches from Washington, D.C. We hope to be joined by the Reverend Joseph Evans. If so, we will bring him on at that time. We're also joined by Cam Howard. He is the National Co-Chair of our Legacy organization, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, better known as NCOBRA, from Chicago, Illinois. Dr. Julianne Malveaux, that's right, the one and only Dr. Julianne Malveaux, the newly installed dean, inaugural dean of the College of Ethnic Studies, Cal State University, Los Angeles, from Los Angeles, California. The dynamic Nkechi Taifa, founder and principal of and CEO of the Taifa Group, and author of the best-selling book, Black Power, Black Lawyer, Nkechi Taifa. And we have Montega Simmons. He's a dynamic brother. He is the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Movement for Black Lives from St. Louis, Missouri. We have an awesome, awesome, awesome panel, and we're ready to get this conversation started. We want to begin with Nkechi Taifa. Nkechi, we just have a short period of time, and this is a challenging request of you, but you do it better than anyone else I know. A lot of people may not be familiar with, we assume they are, but maybe not, what reparations is and how it has evolved. So if you would just take a minute or a few minutes for the PNBC audience and give us a brief overview of the historic struggle of Africans in Americas for reparations.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daniels. You know, the demand for reparations in the United States, it's not new. The claim didn't drop from the sky with Ta-Nehisi Coates' treatise, The Case for Reparations in Atlantic magazine, or from Randall Robinson's book, The Debt, What America Owes to Blacks, both of which galvanized the issue in different decades and thrust it into the national conversation. Indeed, there really has been no substantial period of time when the call for redress was not passionately voiced. Two of the first formal records for petitions for reparations were pursued, and they were won from formerly enslaved Black women, Belinda Royal and Henrietta Wood. Then there was the pension movement seeking compensation from enslavement from federal agencies during the late 19th century, led by Kelly House and Reverend Isaiah Dickinson. There was the repatriation movement of Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association during the early part of the 20th century. There was Queen Mother Audley Moore. There was the Nation of Islam. There was James Foreman. Yes, even Dr. Martin Luther King. There was the Black Panther Party, Imari Obadeli and the Republic of New Africa, and more. And in 1987, the founding of NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, which I say thrust us into the era that we are in now, what I call the modern day reparations movement, energizing so many more voices to this issue. And then in the 21st century, NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission, joined these historic efforts, adding its energy to the pursuit for reparations in the United States. So it's really quite clear that the demand for reparations has been long and it has been continuous. But in the context of Black people in America, the quest for reparations essentially constitutes four elements. Number one, the formal acknowledgement of historical wrong, and an official unfettered apology. Number two, the recognition that the injury continued and still manifests today. Number three, the commitment to redress by the federal government, which sanctioned the enslavement and subsequent segregation by the states, by corporate entities, by academic and religious institutions, as well as private estates, which enjoyed unjust enrichment. And then number four, the actual compensation in whatever form or forms are agreed upon. In 1987, there was federal legislation passed in this country offering an official apology and reparations for Japanese Americans during World War II. But it is a sad commentary that the United States has not taken responsibility for its role in enslavement and post-slavery apartheid practices. It's never attempted reparation for Black people for the extortion of labor for generations, deprivation of freedom and human rights, and terrorism against them throughout the centuries. Shortly after the passage of the Japanese American Bill, Congressman John Conyers introduced H.R. 40, strategically patterned off of the Japanese American Redress Bill, to provide a commission to study the issue and make recommendations. But let us be clear, the redress is not just for the enslavement era alone. The inhumanity of the enslavement era and beyond were fundamental features of the growth and development in the United States. Following the abolition of slavery, the US government at the federal, state, and local levels perpetrated, condoned, and profited from policies and practices that continue to brutalize and disadvantage Blacks, including the Black codes and the convict leasing system and the peonage and the sharecropping systems and the denials of the benefits of the Homestead Act and GI Bill and the redlining, the gerrymandering, the unequal education, the health disparities, the racial wealth gap, mass incarceration, and more. And today, as I'm coming to a close, the groundswell of reparations activities spanning federal, state, local governments, universities, religious institutions, industries, and corporate entities, slavery disclosure ordinances have been passed revealing historical ties to slavery and financial institutions. But it is the federal bill on the table right now, H.R. 40, whose banner is now being carried high by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, that has provided the mechanism through which to have a public policy conversation about this issue in the Congress of the United States. We must acknowledge, and with repair, we must heal, we must close this shameful era of US history.
You know, I get caught up with Nkechi and I forgot where I'm at, because you know she can show enough bring it. All right, thank you so much. Reverend Joanne Watson, you have a storied history of human rights and civil rights activism. You were an aide and confidant of the legendary Congressman John Conyers. You, more than anyone else, know how H.R. 40 was born. Please take us behind the scenes and share how Congressman Conyers was persuaded to become the legislative champion of H.R. 40.
Thank you, Dr. Ron Daniels, and thank you, Dr. Tyrone Pitts. Giving honor to our Father God, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and our Mother, African Holy Spirit. I'm so privileged to be here today, and I want to thank you for the invitation. As a reparations activist since my youth, I was mentored by Dr. Mario Bedelli, Reverend Gaidi Obedelli, RNA pioneers, and Reparations Ray Jenkins, who convinced another mentor and my boss, Congressman John Conyers, to introduce reparations legislation after Japanese Americans received $20,000 each and a letter of apology in 1989 via the Civil Rights Redress Act. Congressman Conyers did introduce H.R. 40, and the 40 was deliberately selected because the 40 acres and the mule that was promised was not manifested to millions of newly freed Africans. Reparations Ray was on the National Board of NCOBRA, founder of the Detroit NCOBRA chapter, and was on the planning committee of the wonderful effort led by Reverend Dr. C.L. Franklin, Aretha's father, to lead a walk to freedom in Detroit in June '63, where King first proclaimed, "I have a dream." Reparations Ray sent me to the 2001 UN World Conference Against Racism, where it was declared that the transatlantic slave trade was a crime against humanity and should always have been so. Now, because Reparations Ray not only was a professional realtor, but was also an elected precinct delegate, that meant he had a right to go to every Democratic Party meeting and speak And that's what he did. After the Japanese received their $20,000 in letter of apology, he attended every meeting that was held by the Democratic Party in Congressman Conyers' district. And at every meeting, he got up and went to the microphone and demanded a reparations legislation. That's what he did. He did that. I was there. He got up, and they were friends, but he wasn't treating Congressman Conyers like a friend. He was demanding reparations legislation, and he demanded it. And at a certain point, Congressman said, you know, Ray is right. Ray is right. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And Congressman Conyers strategically waited every year that he was introducing bills. He waited until it was time for number 40 to come so that HR 40 could always be the tag for the reparations legislation. Reparations Ray didn't just do that. He was active supporting. He was active in supporting the co-sponsors. He was active in supporting NCOBRA. He held rallies. He raised money for NCOBRA. He raised money for reparations. He sent people to Washington to help lobby folks to get on board. He was adamant about Congressional Black Caucus members signing on to HR 40. And anybody that did not sign on to reparations, Ray Jenkins gave them an earful on every radio and TV show he could access. It's important that we recognize that Mother Rosa Parks, when she was working for Congressman John Conyers, would regularly, with Conyers' permission, call the federal prisons when Dr. Mario Bedelli was being held for 5 years. She would call and ask, how is he doing? How are you treating him? And she would use her name, Rosa Parks, and she would also use the name of John Conyers. And Mario Bedelli said later that those calls from Rosa Parks while he was in prison are the reason he was alive when he left prison. The connection between those who were active in the reparations movement never was just extended to NCOBRA activists or Republican New Africa. It should be known that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights pioneers absolutely embraced reparations. They embraced reparations. Mother Rosa Parks embraced reparations and came to an NCOBRA National Convention in downtown Detroit and sat right next to Queen Mother Moore. It's important that we recognize the roots of reparations, and this legislation, the seeds were planted by Reparations Ray Jenkins. The seeds were watered by Congressman John Conyers, and everybody who's active as a proponent of reparations, from those who participated in the Brain Trust of the Congressional Black Caucus to those who just worked in the field, telling and educating their people about reparations. As Reparations Ray would say, reparations, it's not a handout, it's a debt owed.
I keep forgetting to unmute myself. I'm getting caught up in the program. It's not good for the moderator. But that's the behind the scenes story. And we wanted to ask that question because she told it like it is. Sometimes you see the public face. You see the person who is seen as the hero, the legislator. But you can't forget Reparations Ray. You can't forget Rosa Parks. You can't forget all the people that were talked about by Reverend Joanne Watson. We now turn to Reverend Dr. Turner. The nation has just experienced the commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre and the destruction of Black Wall Street. Why is the unfulfilled struggle for justice for the survivors and descendants important to the struggle for reparations and HR 40? Reverend Dr. Turner.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Daniels, and my hat goes off to those dynamic women, powerfully spoken and very, very well eloquently stated women warriors in the movement. Thank God for them and everybody else who's on this panel. I am sitting right now in my office at the historic Vernon Edmond Church, where from May 31st to June the 1st in the year of our Lord 1921, African Americans who had risen above the standards set by them from white society, who at a time when it was against the law for them to know how to read or write, had over 600 businesses, including law firms and dental office and libraries and hospitals. And in 18 hours, in less than 18 hours, sheer terror reigned. And America was attacked for the first time by aerial assault. And America was attacked for the first time by aerial assault from within. This was not Al Qaeda. This was not the Japanese. This was her own red-blooded American citizens whose skin was white. And the first victims of that aerial terrorism were Black people, where over 300 people were killed, 10,000 people made homeless, 1,256 homes destroyed, babies killed, unborn children killed. That was one story of a woman, because during the massacre, they would come to you at gunpoint and ask you to leave your house. And if you didn't get out, they shot at you. Sometimes you came out, they still shot at you. And there's one story where this pregnant mother who was walking in the line to the concentration camps, and she couldn't walk as fast as the other women. She was asked to leave the line and step outside. And she approached, the white mob approached her, and they saw she was pregnant and she could not walk as fast as everyone else. They come and they get their knife. They cut the woman's stomach. They snatch the baby out of the woman's stomach, throw the baby onto the ground, take their cowboy boot and stomp the baby's head in while the baby is still attached to the mother's umbilical cord, and told the mother to told the mother of the unborn child to get back in line and keep walking. And the mother had to pick up her unborn child with the head smashed in and kept walking to the concentration camps. And that white man with his cowboy boot was never brought to justice. So to me, for those who advocate for the rights of the unborn, where are you on this issue? Where countless of unborn Black children, Black babies were killed inside of the womb. And so for me, because oftentimes when people hear about reparations, they only deduce it to slavery, and that was terrible. Chattel slavery was the worst form of slavery in the history of the world. But that is not the only debt America owes to Black people. If our suffering had stopped at 1865, we would be a lot better off than we are today. If our suffering had stopped at the Emancipation Proclamation, if our suffering stopped at Juneteenth, right? On June 19th, 1865, we know that still did not free a lot of our brothers and sisters, because our Native American tribes kept their slaves a year later. So you have Black folks still in bondage to Native American tribes, and those freedmen have not received reparations from those tribes that held them in bondage. So that's a whole other conversation about reparations needed for Black people. But if it had just stopped then, we'd be a lot better. But no, it kept going, because after we were emancipated, after we were free to what? Free to famine, free to be sharecroppers, free to Jim Crow, free to mass incarceration, free to be homeless. So even after emancipation, we were basically free to suffer and free to go to prison. And that's when the mass incarceration began. We were free to redline and free to, as the sisters before me mentioned, a gross mistreatment of our people. And of course, free to suffer in the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. And so for all of that and more that we have not mentioned, are our people entitled to reparations, not because of a victim mentality, not because we needed to survive, because obviously Black folk can survive. We know how to take lemons and make lemonade. We take intestines and make chitlins. We know how to take the least and make it to the best. We don't need that check to make our bills get paid. We deserve it as citizens of this nation who've never seen justice. So thank you for allowing me to share, and God bless you.
Well, thank you very much, Reverend Turner, for that powerful, powerful, moving testimonial. And it reminds me of invoking the name of Nana Patricia Newton, among others, about the epigenetic cross-generational trauma that our people feel, the pain that we still carry in our bosom, in our bones, because we have never ever been healed, from these horrific terroristic attacks. Now I'd like to turn to Dr. Julianne Malveaux. In a real sense, the terrorist assault on the Greenwood Black Wall Street community in Tulsa was a result of what you have called white economic envy. talk to us about white economic envy and the issue of reparations and HR 40. Dr. Julianne Malveaux.
First of all, Dr. D, thank you for putting us together, not only in this space, but also with NARC. Your brilliance, your ability to create a cadre of people who are willing to work on this issue has been extremely important, and I appreciate you for it. Secondly, of course, the sisters and brother who have come before me, I honor you and appreciate and respect you so very much for the work that we've collectively done to deal with some of these issues. I have to tell you that as Reverend Turner spoke, the tears began to come up to my eyes because so much of this is so real and yet so unrecognized. People want to deal with enslavement as if that was the end, but it was the beginning. White economic envy would not allow Black people to thrive after enslavement. We did stuff. In 1880, there was $1 Black dollar for every 36 white dollars. By 1910, it was $1 Black dollar for every 16 white dollars. We cut the wealth gap in half. We still haven't done that. So today we're looking at $1 Black dollar for every 10 or 7, whoever say, but we have not done as much as our ancestors did in the period after enslavement. How come? Because when we began to gain, white economic envy began to overtake us. Laws were passed to prevent us from accumulating. Laws were passed to allow people to just take our stuff. I want to just give you a couple. Okay, the first lynching ought to be well documented was a lynching of Tommy Moss and 2 of his friends. Tommy Moss was a Black man who was a postmaster, a church deacon, all that in his community. When there was a store that a white man owned that disrespected Black women all kind of ways, Tommy and his friends said, well, we could start our own store. So they did, the People's Grocery in Memphis, Tennessee. They started their own store. White folks were not very happy. How dare these Negroes start their own store? We're not going to have that. And so when some minor dispute about marbles erupted, Tommy Moss and his friends were lynched by this white man who ended up getting Tommy Moss's store for 8 cents on the dollar. That is nothing but white economic envy. Let's fast forward to Wilmington, North Carolina, where we're looking at basically Black folks and Republicans, they were the good guys then, coming together to try to take over city. Well, the night before the election, the 60 most prominent Black men were arrested and held. The next morning, they were giving one-way tickets out of town. They had to leave all their stuff, their homes, their businesses. Alexander Manley was one of the ones we should know about. Alexander Manley was the publisher of the Black newspaper. Alexander Manley essentially had to leave quickly. He ended up being a house painter. So you go from being a newspaper publisher to a house painter in Philly. His grandson, there's a film called Wilmington on Fire that I adore, and his grandson talks about what their family lost. Fast forward to Tulsa or Rosewood. Anytime Black people had anything, white people got mad. We can look at East St. Louis in 1919. DC, they were pulling Black people off of streetcars because we dared ride them in 1921. The Red Summer of 1919 was basically about white economic envy. And so why is this important? Because many of us would stop our story with enslavement. But the fact is that post-enslavement, there was active action to prevent Black people from accumulating, whether it was gerrymandering laws, whether it was the Fair Housing Act, whether it was minimum wage laws that excluded Black women and farm workers. Basically, there was a cabal of white people, and I use that word deliberately because, I'm going to start using their language. But there was a cabal of white people who decided that Black people could not accumulate it. And even to this day, we have basic barriers for accumulation. So when we talk about reparations, we don't need to talk about enslavement. After enslavement, if white folks had left us alone, we'd have been fine. We would have been just fine because we were accumulating, we were building, we were developing our historically Black colleges and universities and so many other things. That did not need to happen if white folks attempted to run the show. So we need to call it what it is. Let me say something to y'all. I am starting a role in my life that excites me tremendously. I will be the Dean of the College of Ethnic Studies at Cal State LA. Why does it excite me? Because it allows me to work with other intellectuals to reclaim this history. Not only Black history, but to Latinx people. Y'all just took Mexico and then said, oh, well, something wrong with them. Asian people, you interred them. Okay, Japanese people got $20,000. Did that really ever repair anything? And I'm charged with starting a Department of Native American Studies, and this was the original sin. And so when we look at reparations, what we're looking at is not only restorative economic justice in Kichi, but also reclaiming the history that we've all been taken from. Right. We must take this history and make it right.
Okay,
I do apologize.
That's why we understand. But this concept of white economic envy is a critical contribution to the conversation of what has been, what is much needed in terms of us moving forward. Reverend Alexander, you have been an invaluable, and we thank you so much, participant in the HR 40 strategy group that meets every Thursday. I think we have to week number 46 now. And you've been at the forefront of advocating for HR 40. Why are you so passionate? Because I hear you on and you be bringing it, passionate about reparations. And would you share with our audience the amazing work that the National Council of Churches is doing in supporting HR 40?
Thank you, Dr. Daniels. And I want to thank Dr. Pitson, who has been a mentor and colleague in this work since I've started it 20 years ago, not just in reparations, but in racial justice and equity through a faith-based lens. Recently, a republication of Dr. William Augustus Jones Jr.'s book, God in the Ghetto. There is one particular quote that says, where he says, the things that belong to God are in such radical opposition to the human order as presently structured that God can be called without apology, God the revolutionary. That kind of language sets my spirit on fire. I do this work because I feel called by God in the very recesses of my being to be an advocate in justice for truth, and in the ways that truth and justice is reparations in itself. How do we get to be a people that God has called us to be, the people that God created us all to be? So I work out of a lens that I call prophetic revolutionary imagination, because we are so bombarded in the lies and distortion here in this country that it takes a prophetic revolutionary imagination to even fathom what justice might look like. I also do this work as one who comes from having practiced law and now working as an ordained clergy in the Baptist tradition. That again is all this debate about critical race theory. No, I did not learn that at the University of Missouri Columbia, where they were not trying to talk about critical race theory. But my mama, my grandmama, my church, and my history told me that you have to connect policies and laws with our history as a people in telling that truth. So that is my passion. It's what I eat, live, breathe, sleepless nights and deal with. The National Council of Churches is where I'm currently living that call out. On April 4th, 2018, on the 50th anniversary of the martyrdom of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the NCC launched its Act Now to End Racism initiative. The emphasis of this initiative as the acronym indicates, seeks to A, awaken individuals, congregations, society to the truth regarding racism and its impact. C, confront the ways in which truth has been hidden, distorted, and lied about. And in the process, with God's help, T, transform the minds and hearts of people, congregations, and the systems and structures that perpetuate the systemic and systematic racism that plague our nation. The passing and implementation of HR 40 is a personification of the Act Now initiative. We review all of our policies and advocacy work from a racial equity lens, but HR 40 will do what I call codify the truth of our history and all of the information that will be gathered, the studies, resources, testimonies that will be collected and used to develop reparation proposals. We cannot transform as a nation and move forward without repenting and making atonement for our past. The bill also lays a foundation for looking at how we propose legislation moving forward. The NCC has worked closely, as you mentioned, with the HR 40 coalition, but also with our communion partners and interfaith organizations for the passage of this bill. The Christian community must be engaged in this conversation and at the forefront in addressing racism in our nation. Why the Christian church? It is the Christian church that distorted doctrines and biblical interpretation that birthed colonialism, imperialism, and the racial divide that is the DNA of this nation. And therefore our responsibility to confess, repent, and repair the breach for fruit that is grown from that tree of injustice. On that road to repair, the NCC is working at putting this at the forefront and elevating this issue. HR 40 is one of our priorities, policy priorities for 2021, and highlights some of the things that we've been doing. We've been doing series of conversations called Faith and Fire. We've dealt with white privilege, reparations. We have a whole set of resources on reparations under our anti-racism link. There's a toolkit on HR 40 that gives biblical justification, theological reflections. There's been faith sign-on letters in support of sponsorship and passage of the bill. And recently we published a policy statement on the dangers of Christian nationalism. And so this is very important for us. And again, not only are we required, I also want us to know that what we do is important because we speak truth not to power. We speak truth in power, in the power of the God that is within us. And that is power and a unified voice of we the people, so that we can then become who we say we are as a nation, as a people.
All right, thank you so much. Again, our topic is people of faith acting to advance reparations in HR 40. And we couldn't do this work without having the voice of some dynamic young people. So we now introduce Brother Montega Simmons, who is we've already introduced him. The Black Movement for Black Lives is at the cutting edge of educating, mobilizing, and organizing young people to fight for reparations in HR 40. Would you talk to us about why young people should be involved in the struggle and some of the tools that the Movement for Black Lives has developed in order to engage young people?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Daniels. And thank you first to my fellow panelists and to the Progressive National Baptist Convention for including us. So M4BL was largely created or born out of the resistance that actually took place in Ferguson, Missouri, in St. Louis, where I am, both in response to the murder of Mike Brown Jr. and to so many before and afterwards. Organizations not only wanted to harness the energy that was in the streets, but to begin to move forward to real transformation. So in August of 2016, endorsed by over 50 Black-led organizations in the Movement for Black Lives ecosystem, hundreds of allied organizations and individuals created and introduced a political platform, which we call the Vision for Black Lives. that has since inspired campaigns across the country to achieve its goals. And the platform was framed under 6 core planks. One being to end the war that exists on Black people, and then to repair the damage, specifically for reparations, to create economic justice, and to divest from those systems that actually are harming our community and invest in systems that actually help us to thrive. And then for our communities to actually regain control and build political power. The commitment up front was not to reform the systems that have been brutalizing us since we've been here. It's to transform and to repair the damage that has been done. The organizations, honestly, from the very beginning, had a commitment to reparations, but did not know how to begin to implement that in terms of campaigns. So in 2019, some of the organizers came together and developed and introduced a toolkit that was targeted specifically to help grassroots organizers be grounded in definitions and a fundamental history of the reparations movement, along with case studies that demonstrated both how we've actually fought for reparations, how we've won them, what we've learned, what we've achieved, and why we still have to fight. So this year, M4BL is actually relaunching and updating this plank of the platform this month in the name of Juneteenth, when it was first introduced, in the name of Tulsa at 100 years, in the name of literally an ongoing tidal wave of lives that have been lost, both in the wave of COVID and in the streets, the folks that went to the street in the name of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others last year. We're making a series of educational offerings specifically to help people better understand reparations and get the skills that they need in order to start local reparations campaigns and support national efforts to pass reparations legislation. So in addition to our own support for advancing HR 40 as federal legislation, organizations inside of our ecosystem have innovated policy interventions that range from reparations for police violence, to climate reparations, to reparations for the war on drugs, and continue to innovate policy demands that work to transform and repair our communities. So what we'll ask at this time, especially for those of you that have not deeply been engaged in this work, is that you actually visit us at our website to take a look at the toolkit, the tools, everything that's been released this month. Visit us at M4BL, M, the number 4, the letter B, then L.org. Plug into the toolkits, plug into the Vision for Black Lives platform, and then also text DEFEND to 90975, because our people are organizing. Our people are fighting at every level, not for reform, but for repair and transformation. They're doing it in the streets. They're doing it in our halls of legislation. They're doing it from DC to state capitals across the country. And we invite you to stand with us and fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Montega Simmons. And when I talked to Reverend Dr. Tyrone Pitts, he said he was particularly interested in the young folk who are part of the Progressive National Baptist Convention being able to have something to grab hold to. So I appreciate you putting that in the chat, and hopefully people in the audience will be able to grab hold to it. Last but certainly not least, we call on Cam Howard, because NCOBRA has been the hammer. It has been in the forefront. It has been the organization that has helped to get the largest number of people as co-sponsors on HR 40 and S40 in the history of the struggle. It could not have happened without our legacy organization NCOBRA and the superb leadership of the male co-chair for the National Coalition for Blacks and Reparations in America, and that is Cam Howard. Cam, would you just give us, a notion of where we are with HR 40, a little bit about what it was in its inception? We've heard about that, how it's been changed, because some people are not as clear about that. But then what can people do? There's got all kinds of tools that have been developed by NCOBRA in order to take us across the finish line. Cam Howard.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels. And I too want to thank all the other panelists for such inspiring and committed conversation, as well as leadership that they've also channeled in this movement. And I certainly stand on the shoulders of many who have spoken already. Where we at HR 40, we had a tremendous time in the history of this legislation. As you stated, as Kichi and Dr. Watson stated, this legislation was first introduced in 1989 by Congressman John Conyers. And of course, we were, and COBRA was there at the beginning. And what it was initially designed to do was to study, give a definitive governmental report on the period of enslavement and the period of Jim Crow segregation, make a definitive statement on that history, because many people were in denial. America was not really informed about the history of enslavement, the history of Jim Crow segregation, and to determine whether or not that history had an effect on current living people of African descent, current living African Americans. And then if it did, then make recommendations on how we can address those. And so what we found out in 2015 at NARC's inaugural meeting, we had known that, but what we really put forth at that particular time, that the current bill as it was written was obsolete. We knew that there was continued injury. There was a compendium amount of research that was already out there that showed this continued injury. The two congressional apologies from the House and the Senate both quoted Presidents Clinton and President Bush, who stated that the history of enslavement and Jim Crow segregation was the cause of some of the most bitter challenges that this country faced, and particularly African Americans. The international community at the 2001 World Conference Against Racism had also stated that the challenges that people of African descent, Black people whose ancestors were removed from the continent during the transatlantic slave trade, they suffered from some of the worst conditions on the planet, and it was a direct result of the periods of enslavement and post-enslavement apartheid, or Jim Crow as it was called in America. So we did not need to study to determine whether or not we were still affected. We knew we were still affected. And so we began to talk amongst ourselves, NARC, that is National African American Reparations Commission, and we petitioned Congressman Conyers and asked him to submit a remedy bill, submit a revised legislation. It would not be a study bill, but it would be a remedy bill. It would be a bill that began with the notion that there's continued injury, not determine whether or not there was continued injury, but it would begin from that particular point that there's continued injury. And not only will we study the periods of enslavement and the periods of Jim Crow, but as our brothers and sisters from Moving Black Lives assisted us at the time and said, we need to go beyond Jim Crow and look at the current conditions, the current acts of harms that this nation is engaging in: mass incarceration, police terror, the predatory lending, things that happened after 1965. So this bill looks at the period of enslavement, looks at the period of Jim Crow segregation or the apartheid period in America, and it looks at the post-Jim Crow period all the way up into today. And it must determine how each of these periods affect us today. We know that COVID showed a lot of the health effects, negative health effects of enslavement and Jim Crow segregation, et cetera. But in every area of life, we can know that there's a direct contribution or a direct line of where we are from enslavement, where we are from Jim Crow, et cetera. And once those harms are identified, then they must be remedied. Policies must be crafted, and they must be crafted in alignment with international norms and international law around reparations, not just something that we hope will address these injuries, but things that we know, the areas that we know are needed in order for people to be made whole as a result of crimes committed against our humanity. Where are we at with this bill right now? As you stated, we have close to 200 co-sponsors. We started in January with 117 co-sponsors, the most any time this bill has been introduced. In February, we had our second congressional hearing in 2 Congress sessions on the bill. In April, the bill was voted out of the Judiciary Committee. An historic vote, unanimously voted by the Democratic Party to move this bill to the House floor. So where are we at now? And what must we do now? Where we are now is where we've never been. We're at a historic place, but also we have to know that there's still a lot more work to do. We're at the point where this bill can be pushed to the floor. What we need is organizations, church groups to really target 3 particular targets. One is Democratic leadership, in particular Steny Hoyer, who's the Democratic leader of the House, he should be made known that we want this bill to go to the floor for a vote immediately. It's made it out of the Judiciary Committee. The only thing stopping it from going to the floor is he scheduling it for a floor vote. So we have to target Steny Hoyer and say we want this bill to the floor, and we want to the House floor, and we want to vote ASAP. The second target is senators, primarily Democratic senators. We know that we have to convince, which we will go, the third target is the second, but we need as many more Democratic senators sign on this bill on S40 as possible, because, you know, once it makes out of the Senate, then it goes to out of the House, it then goes to the Senate for a vote. And so we need senators signed on. So we need to be calling out these senators. We need to be writing them. We need to be visiting their office now that things are opening back up, and making sure that they understand that this is the issue of the day for people of African descent. And the final target, understanding the Senate reality, is that a vote in the Senate will require 60 senators, a filibuster-proof Senate. And we know that we probably would not have 10 Republicans who would jump over and sign on to this legislation as they did the Juneteenth bill. And so what we were going to do, or what we have to do, is then pivot this Democratic, this view of the Democratic Party, the majority of the Democratic Party on the House and the Senate, saying that they're for this legislation, and now we go to the president for an executive order, since his party leaders in the House, Pelosi, Hoyer, and the leader Schumer in the Senate have already stated that they want this bill to be passed. And so, because the reality in the Senate that it would not be a filibuster-proof vote, we need to then move this to the president's desk and tell him that we want this bill passed via an executive order. So much has happened in the world, so much has happened in America and in our community in the last 2 years, and certainly the reparations struggle has benefited from all this action. We're at a time for a global shift around this issue of repair and reparations. We must not allow all that has happened to go to waste. We must seize this time. And again, HR 40 is right there for us to push across the table and to make it a law. Thank you, Dr. Daniels.
Thank you so much, Cam Howard. And what a powerful, powerful, powerful set of presentations to our beloved Progressive National Baptist Convention for this National Progressive National Baptist Convention hour broadcast. We really appreciate all the panelists. I won't repeat all their names because we're out of time. And we do have to yield the floor now to our esteemed leader, our visionary leader, the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee. So I'm signing off so that you can hear from the woman who is taking us across the finish line, the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee. We thank you.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and greetings to the Progressive National Baptist Convention. So excited to be able to be greeting all of the outstanding shepherds and leaders that are gathered here for this very special occasion. And Dr. Tyrone Pitts, thank you for your years of service as the General Secretary of this great convention. Now that you're retiring, let us thank you again for your commitment, your dedication, and your faith. Thank you. Let me also acknowledge those who are members from my constituency, because we thank you for the great work that you have done. I'm excited to be with you today and to emphasize that we've come a mighty long way through COVID. I know that many of the churches in your convention have had to do virtual churches. I'm told by many of my spiritual leaders that the churches have just imploded with membership. God is a blessing God, but I also know that many have suffered loss through church leaders and pastors that have lost their life through COVID-19. To God be the glory for where we are today, and for me to have the ability to speak with you on such important issues. I know the history of this great convention, having started and been organized in 1961 in Cincinnati, Ohio. As I said, members of my constituency churches are members of this great Progressive National Baptist Convention. I know your involvement in the civil rights movement and encouraging the work of SCLC, CORE, and SNCC in direct action, civil rights action. You were the pillow, you were the support, you were the backbone of those movements. You understood the need for freedom and the need for the right to vote. So today we have a new agenda an agenda that fights for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and voting rights. But we also have a very special need and advocacy for you. And this most recent week, we were able, after 156 years, to create a national holiday that would acknowledge the bondage of the descendants of enslaved Africans and those Africans that were slaves during that time. Juneteenth is not a singular narrow holiday. It is the first holiday in 156 years in the history of the United States Congress that has ever emphasized and laid the groundwork for the discussion of slavery and the honor of those who died in bondage, and the trajectory, the travel, the journey of the descendants of enslaved Africans, all of us, into 2021, all of the disparities that we faced, all of the laws that discriminated against us. This bill gives the opportunity against this negative talk of critical race theory that really doesn't exist, but really to have the kind of open forums and discussion in churches and universities and schools about the period of slavery. Thank you so very much for your celebrating it and your supporting it, as I understand was done across America on Juneteenth. I was proud to be the only member to carry that legislation, introduce that legislation. But it goes directly into a message that we think is crucially important. We had 215 members of the United States House of Representatives vote for a Juneteenth bill. Again, a national federal holiday, only 11 such holidays in this nation. But now is another hurdle of work that we need to do, and that is the importance of H.R. 40, the Commission to Study Slavery and to develop reparation proposals. Everywhere I go, people understand the simplicity, but yet the seriousness of this legislation. I let you know, brothers and sisters, that it is grounded, it has a foundation on truth. It has a foundation on the huge wealth gap. Now, $17,000 for a family of four that happen to be African Americans, $174,000 for a white family, a huge wealth gap. It deals with the disparities in healthcare, the disparities in education, sociologically, scientific and economic disparities, and it deals with the reality of what happens to us in healthcare. During our debate on this question in our hearings, we found out that a Harvard University peer-reviewed medical school analysis said that if African Americans had reparations during COVID-19, we would not have been the sickest, we would not have died the most, or the infected the most. So this great convention, you have always been at the forefront of freedom and justice and equality. We need your help on H.R. 40 as we move to the floor of the House, having passed it out of the Judiciary Committee on April 14th, 2021. I'm grateful to Dr. Ron Daniels and the 300 organizations in COBRA and the National Association of the Commission on Reparations and many others who have been working with us, civil rights organizations, ACLU, Human Rights Watch, because it is a human rights issue. Let me share with you that now is the time for H.R. 40, the Commission to study slavery and develop reparation proposals. I know that we can do this together. I hope you have a blessed convention. All of this speaks to our history, our courage, our fight, and yes, our freedom. Thank you so very much. May God bless all of you, and may God bless the United States of America.